Hello everyone, welcome to Imprint IAS and I'm Varun Khuller, and we're now looking at part 2 of chapter 5, that is the architecture of the constitution, basic features and institutions, right? Okay, so let's start. Right. Now, the institution of the vice president is first, right? Now, it's basically given in Article 63 of the Constitution. It says there shall be a vice president of India, and he is also the ex officio chairperson of the Council of States or the chairperson of the Council of States. Basically, why does his role is there? So, if the president dies in office or is unable to perform his duties because of illness or any other cause or is removed or resigned, the vice president is enjoined upon by Article 65 to act as the president, right? And this has happened in two occasions. Dr. Zakir Hussain and Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, they both died in office, and Vice President V.V. Giri and B.D. Jati had to step in. And therefore, obviously the office of the choice of the vice president has to be made with great care. And the present vice president, right? Can anybody name him? Right? If you can, please, comment on the section below, right? Then, as you know, how is if you election of the vice president? Let's look at that. Article 66. It says that the vice president shall be elected, right, by the members of the electoral college, consisting of members of both the houses of parliament, right? So here there's not a distinction between the nominated members and the elected members in this case. Then we have the eligibility conditions. He has to be a citizen of India. He has to be 35 years of age and should be qualified to be member of the Rajya Sabha, because obviously he has to hold the chair there. Then he has to be eligible, and obviously it also means that the office of profit clause has to be applied to him, right? So he cannot hold the office of profit, and moreover he cannot be an MP or MLA, and if he is, he has to vacate as soon as he's elected, right? So basically, as soon as a vice president is elected, he's basically made into the he resigns from his position as a minister or so on. Then the term is 5 years, right? And he can resign, obviously, to the president. He also can be removed, but it has to be passed by majority of both the houses, right? And there has to be a notice given of 14 days, right, for his the impeachment process, that is the process of removal. Let's go for the next institution, that is the Council of Ministers. Now, the Council of Ministers historically was started by Lord Canning in 1861, right? And the Council of Ministers is the real executive, and obviously, specifically, this has been mentioned in our Article 74, right? So the Article 74 basically talks about this. It says there shall be a Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister at the head to aid and advise the President, who shall, in the exercise of this function, act in accordance with such advice. Okay. Now this was obviously in the 42nd Amendment and the 44th Amendment. It was these things have been inserted here, right? And obviously, there's also a clause here that the president may require the council of ministers to reconsider such advice once, and obviously, if it is again rebutted, the prime president shall accordingly, go with the advice which is tendered, right? And anything advised by the ministers to the president shall not be inquired in any court of law. So that has been mentioned in this. Remember the fact that the prime minister is the most important person, right, in the structure, right? It's not a homogeneous entity, it is a hierarchy, right? It has a strength of 15% of the strength of the Lok Sabha, and this has been added by the 91st Amendment Act in 2003. The constitution does not mention the different categories of ministers, such as the cabinet ministers, minister of states, and deputy ministers, except in Article 352, where the cabinet is defined as the council consisting of the ministers of cabinet rank. Okay, there are other ministers also. There is a minister of state or MO's independent charge. There is a minister of state assisted the cabinet ministers. There is deputy ministers, which has been disused, and there is a parliament secretary, which has not been filled since 1967. Right. Remember, the MOS independent charges are basically less important portfolios, and the cabinet ministers are the ones which are very, very important. Let's go to the next topic. That's the parliament. Okay. The parliament has been mentioned in Article 79 of the Constitution, right? And this is chapter 2, sorry. And it says that parliament, there shall be a parliament for the union, which consists of the president and two houses, to be known respectively as the Council of States and the Council of the people. So basically, the Rajya Sabha is the Council of States, and the lower house of the Lok Sabha is the House of the People. Now, Rajya Sabha, has 250 members, and it has 238 which are elected by the various state legislative assemblies or Vidhan Sabhas, where a system of proportional representation by the means of a single transferable vote, right? While there are another 12 which are nominated by the president on the advice of the government, and this basically represents different fields such as education, social work, media, and sports. And remember, Vijay Mallya was also a part of this. Maybe they also want to represent people like him also in the. Maybe that tells us how democratic we are in some. Now, on the other hand, the Lok Sabha, right, shall consist of, it mentioned in Article 81, obviously it's for 5 years, right, but it shall not consist of more than 530 members chosen by direct elections, not more than 20 in to represent, the union territories. Okay, so that's the idea. Around 550 is the number we're looking at, right? So that's why we have the Malvankar rule, right, which says that for the leader of opposition, you need a minimum of 10%, that is 55, right, people as the if you want to become the leader of the opposition, right? Uh, okay, then we have constituencies which are territorial and single membered, and they're divided among states roughly in proportion to the population. And this is done with the population of the 1971 census. Okay, and it is the 84th Amendment. On the other hand, delimitation is done in 201. So there's a difference between dividing the constitution, dividing the seats. So the number of seats have been fixed as respect to 1971 census. And why this was done? Because obviously Punjab and other states which have actually implemented family planning might lose the seats of parliament to states like UP. And that was the basic controversy also in the Finance Commission using the 2011 census instead of the 1971 census. Okay. Then a certain number of, as I mentioned, there are a certain number of seats mentioned done for the scheduled tribes and scheduled caste, and it is proportional to the population of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So let's say in Andhra Pradesh, the example is given in the book that if 40% of the population is scheduled caste and 10% is scheduled tribe, then 40% of the Lok Sabha seats in Andhra Pradesh only scheduled caste candidates can contest, and another only 10% scheduled tribe candidates can contest. But all the voters can vote. It is not as if only the scheduled caste or the scheduled tribe will vote. All the voters will be able to vote in those constituencies, right? Then the question, then there is obviously in the recent years there have been a lot of reservation, pressure, and there's been reservation, pressure for women. There has been reservation provision by the Patidars in Gujarat, by the Kappus in Andhra, etc., and the Jats in Haryana. No, obviously, reservation is desirable, right? But it is virtually impossible to prevent future claims to the benefit by other groups. And the practice of reservation has been seen to be impossible to reverse. The Constitution envisaged reservation as a short-term measure lasting for 10 years, but no government has ever seriously considered not extending them every 10 years. And now it is more than, I think this will be 70 years now soon. And on the contrary, the demands for reservation and acceptance for reservation has just kept on increasing. We have reservation in promotions, which is now the barrier. The Supreme Court barrier is now ended, and we'll have that as well. The idea is that disadvantaged groups are easily convinced that reservation is a panacea for ills. Because why? For simple reason. Number one is it enables rapid mobility, right, for some visible and some vocal groups, right? And it basically talks about the fact that a bird in hand is better than two in the bush, right? Then obviously we talked about the fact that there are 552 members. We talked about 530 plus 20, but two nominated members from the Anglo-Indian community. Plus they have not been nominated for a very long time now. And in Lok Sabha, you have to be 25 years of age. By convention, the speaker's post goes to the majority party, and the deputy speaker goes to the opposition. Now, this obviously is a very bad thing, because the speaker, being from the majority party, will always, try to help them out, and that has, this position has been misused recently by the BJP government, and always has been actually in some ways. So let's not just talk about one government; it's every government which has misused this speaker's position. But this government did it in the Aadhaar bill by naming it an money bill. Right. Then the parliament has extensive legislative powers, and bills may be introduced in any house. However, there are certain bills which, obviously the president has to, obviously bills have to be assented by the president. But the president obviously can send the bill back if he doesn't like them for reconsideration. But if they're passed again, the president cannot withhold it and say. But the money bill, however, must be introduced first in Lok Sabha and on the president's recommendation. That was what I was saying. There are certain bills which require the recommendation of the president. They go to the Rajya Sabha and if not returned in 14 days, are just passed. So the recommendation of the Rajya Sabha may or may not be accepted by the Lok Sabha in case of money bills. And this is obviously a huge issue as well, right? But then we have the latest problem that is happening is the conduct of members and parties, which have disturbed the president and assent. And there's obviously the traditions of the parliament have been obviously weakened, and there's a popular disgust with the members of parliament, and there's a common feeling that parliament is a big waste of taxpayers' money. Okay, let's look at the next institution, and that's the government in the states and the union territories. Okay, now the biggest problem with this is Article 153, okay, of the Constitution, which talks about the governor, right? And the governor basically works on the pleasure of the president doctrine, that he holds his office on the pleasure of the president. His appointment is done by the president, and 156/1 says the governor shall hold office during the pleasure of the president. And obviously, then there is no qualification except for the fact he is a citizen of India and completed the age of 35 years of age. So what that has done is that the governor typically acts as the stooge of the center in a lot of ways. And in case of Arunachal and in case of Uttarakhand, recently the governor has misused his powers. He has done it similarly in Tamil Nadu, right, as well, and in Goa and Manipur and so on, right? So he's supposed to be a constitutional head, but the idea is that when in the president rule the machinery breaks down, he is supposed to act as run the executive with the help of the advisors appointed by the union government. And obviously, if with such a strong incentive, he loves the president rule. And then, there was an expectation at the beginning that eminent people will become governors, but that has belied. It was supposed to be for eminent educational or a person eminent in other walks of life. But now governors have tended to be more and more active politicians. Many of them have, returned to, full-time politics after they have, given up the governorship. They basically tend to carry out the directives of the party in power in New Delhi and have become active conspirators in murky toppling games. And the most interesting example was Jagmohan, right? Farooq Abdullah, who was the chief minister in 1984, wanted to call immediately a session of the State Assembly, as he wanted to test his majority on the floor of the House, as the 12 members had devastated his party. Now, the governor dismissed his ministry and installed a new man, GM Shah, as the chief minister, right? And this was cited as the central government's infringement on the autonomy of the, state, and was a handy tool for stoking secessionist fires. And actually, in some ways, that led to the Kashmir issue being again blatantly, and we're still having instability after 20 years. Then we have, in Andhra, Governor Ram Lal, instead of summoning the assembly as desired by N.T. Ramarao, so that he could test his majority again, dismissed him on 16 August 1984. So, the idea is that, this was done repeatedly. Okay. Now, let's talk about the state, right, and the state legislature. Now, in the state legislature, it's mentioned in the constitution that it should not consist of more than 500 and not less than 60 members, right? And states have an exclusive right to legislate items on the state list. And there are certain areas, obviously, which are union territories, which come under Article 239 onwards. And it basically talks about, they're enlisted under the lieutenant governors. There's special cases in case of Delhi and Pondicherry, which have created huge issues. There's an amendment, the 69 Amendment 239AA and 239AB, which has led to this, right? And there's a conflict whether the center government, that is the lieutenant governor, or the chief minister, who has the major powers in this case. Then we have the most I would say important portion of the constitution. I think it's the most important amendment that is the local government. So the idea was the constitution did not provide for an exact form of what local government, what kind of government would be, but the DPSP specifically laid that the state should organize village panchayats and endow them to function as units of self-government, and this was Article 40. And besides the legacy of the freedom struggle and especially of Gandhiji, which made panchayats a part of a political program since not the non-cooperation movement, it was thought that yes, this will happen. So, in time, what happened was a high-level committee chaired by Balwant Rai Mehta, who was a veteran Gandhi, was asked to make recommendation. And the Mehta committee, diagnosed the lack of democratic local bodies with real powers as the major cause of the failure of the command development program. And he suggested that Panchayati Raj should be set up. And it should have three levels: the Gram Panchayat to the village level, to basically elected by the adult representatives, then Panchayat Samiti at the block level, and the Zilla Panchayat at the district level, which was supposed to consist of members indirectly elected from the tiers above, as well as they'll obviously have a cooperative movement officials, parliamentarians, and other cooperative to the body. And that was the idea. So, some states, agreed to his recommendations, and between 1959 and 62, agreed to introduce the Panchayati Raj. But what happened was the functioning was not there. What used to happen that they never used to hold elections on time, and many times for years because they favored an unfavorable result. In some cases, even the sarpanches are nominated by the government itself. So it kind of makes in Punjab they say that sarpanch is actually the he is the person who buys his seat, right, or his position, right. Another thing. Then we had other committees, Ashok Mehta Committee 1978, G.V.K. Rao Committee in 1985, L.M. Singhvi Committee in 86. But it finally took a committee by P.K. Thungran, who recommended that Panchayati Raj bodies be constitutionally recognized. And initially it was a 64th Amendment Bill in 1989, but it could not be passed. Finally, the 73rd and 74th Amendment Bill came in 1973, and for the first time we had a constitutional mechanism for establishing panchayat as units of self-government, right? And it also added a new schedule, the 11th schedule, which has 29 subjects, right? So this actually really helps us. Then there's a Constitution of State Finance Commission to review the financial position is also detailed in this. There's also mention of a metropolitan and a district planning committee, which obviously, if done in the spirit, would really make these self-governing institutions. Let's look at the next institution, that's the judiciary. Article 124 to 147 and 214 to 239, 237. They lay down the framework of the judiciary. Very interestingly, the judiciary, before it was, the Supreme Court came into fashion, we had the Federal Court, and the further appeals lay with the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in Britain. The jurisdiction of the Privy Council was abolished in October of 1949, and the Federal Court was replaced by the Supreme Court in January 1950, right? And initially it had Chief Justice and 25 other judges. It was increased, I think, to 31 recently. We'll talk about that, right? Then in the case, so how is it they are appointed? The idea is there's a consultation with the CJI, okay, right? Appointment of other judges always been done with the CJI, and then they actually have, the three judges case and so on. That it led to a collegium system, and they are the ones who are recommending. All right, and I think you should go through this collegium system in much more detail, and we'll talk about that in another video. In 1973 and in 76, the Chief Justice, which is supposed to be the most senior most, this convention was flouted by Indira Gandhi when they were superseded because of the problem they had with the Keshwanand Bharti case and so on. So this act was condemned, and no government has now dared to repeat this act, and it's now the senior most judge who becomes the CJI. Now, the only way the Supreme Court judge can be removed is if each House of Parliament, right, supported by a majority of the House, as well as 2/3 of those present and voting, pass a resolution in the same session and present address to the President asking for removal and there are only two grounds: proven misbehavior or incapacity, right? And To further ensure the independence of judges, there is a bar on their pleading in any court or authority after retirement. But this again was, in the case of Pete Sathavasavan, right, who became the governor of Kerala, and this became a huge issue, right? That CGI agreed to a governorship post after his retirement. Then obviously we have another other features of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, that is, all disputes between the union and the states as well as states, right, are directly seen by it. It can also transfer cases from the lower courts on special leave petition, that is Article 136. It also has sanctioned the practice of public interest litigation, wherein a person or an organization can appeal to the highest court even by the means of ordinary postcard. It has extended the right to life with dignity, to even right to sleep, to right to privacy, and so on. Right. The Supreme Court has played a major role in interpreting the Constitution, especially with regard with changing relationship with fundamental rights and DPSPs. Right. It is limited in its powers in comparison to Supreme Court, right, when it comes to declaring any law unconstitutional, because it does not have the clause of due process of law or standards of natural justice. But it has been made up by the doctrine of basic structure, right? And it says that amendment to the Constitution can be declared invalid if it is destructive of the basic features of the Constitution. And this was done, when we had the NJAC case, right, in which the law minister was added to the process of selecting the judges, and that was obviously against the basic feature of separation of powers. Then we have Aladi. Let's talk about what our constitutional makers talk about it. The Supreme Court, Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, he says the future of the Constitution will thus depend a large extent upon the Supreme Court and the direction given to it by that court. Right? On one occasion, it may appear to favor individual liberty as against state or social control. Another time, it may favor social control or state control. It is the great tribunal which has to draw the line between liberty and social control. The High Court in the states have powers over all the subordinate courts in their jurisdiction. Their powers to issue writs or orders is wider than of the Supreme Court, as it is not restricted to cases of violation of fundamental rights. District courts, if you think about them, obviously there are a lot of cases that they seem to be corrupt, they seem to be not competent. But the district courts, the district judges are appointed by the governor in consultation with the High Court. And corruption is quite common at the lower level, but not common at the High Court, and rare or absent in the Supreme Court. But the biggest problem of the judiciary has been the enormous backlog of cases. It takes years and 10 or 20 years for a case to be decided. Litigation is so expensive and time consuming. As a result, common people hesitate to take recourse to the court. And that has been the biggest problem of our democracy, right? It kind of weakens the idea that democracy exists in India. Okay. Then we have the administrative services, and very interestingly, in India, we inherited the administrative structure. And the idea became that maybe we should get rid of the administrative structure, the steel frame. And Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel actually talked for that. No, we should not, right? Basically, because of the circumstances that led to the independence, the partition, the transfer of population, right, which was unprecedented in known history, the integration of 300 plus princely states, the war in Kashmir, the assassination of Gandhi. So the one island of stability, of predictability, seemed to be the administrative structure, and the idea became that majority of the administrative system, the ICS officers were Indian, and they were very pro-Indian, and there was a question whether he can be to ICS officer, and Sir Umar Shankar Vajpayee, and he was asked whether he can actually because he was a supporter of the British rule, right, can he also support the Indians? He says, if I could so serve well a foreign power, how much better will I serve my own country? And with that, I think the case for the ICS being not there was rejected, and it was implemented that yes, it should be. But in time, the ICS was replaced by the IAS, and we had this concept of a committed bureaucracy, right? And this was started by Indira Gandhi. But there are certain idea is that there has to be fairness in recruitment, and it provided for independent public service commission, the union and the state. So in case of state service commissions, I will say that this fairness in recruitment is not there definitely, but in the case of central, yes, it is to a large extent. That is, the constitution mentions only two all India services initially, the all India services, that is the IAS and the IPS, but it provided for giving more powers to Rajya Sabha to basically have two-third majority and establish a new all India service, right? So the Indian Forest Services and the engineering services were set up under this constitutional provision. Then we have other services, which are the state services, which we have also have the central services like audit services, customs, railways, and they are posted in different parts of the country, and they will always work in central government offices and not in state. Whereas in the IS and the IPS always works with the state government. Uh, Now, there are constitutional safeguards which were intended to encourage independence and integrity in the bureaucracy. Now, what has happened is that it also has encouraged corruption in bureaucracy. It is so difficult to dismiss a civil servant that even gross cases of corruption are ignored because the results are not likely to commensurate with the effort. And as I talked about the fact that there was a notion of committed bureaucracy, right, and commitment was accepted. Basically, the idea was that there was constitutional commitment which was accepted, but now in the 1970s it became commitment to a person. So commitment to a constitution versus commitment to a person, and that has been the debate of the civil services, I would say. Now, in conclusion, I would say that what Granville Austin says, he says India would do as she had done for centuries, take what she had desired from other cultures and bend it to her needs. And the framers of constitution had borrowed freely and unabashedly from other constitutions. He was confident that we had prepared sufficiently for exotic plants and more homegrown ones to take root. The wisdom of the US Constitution and its Supreme Court, the innovation of the Irish Constitution, the time tested conventions of the British Parliament, the administrative minutiae of the Government of India Act 1931, and much else, especially the sense of our own people's struggle for freedom, went into the design of the Constitution. There were many skeptics whether India would actually deliver on the freedoms that she promised. In retrospect, it has not disappointed its architects. It had may, though, let down the skeptics. Right? First and foremost, the institutions created by it, whether it was a civil service, whether it was the judiciary, whether it was the parliament, whether it was the offices of the prime minister, the president, and the vice president, right? The democratic structure has survived and evolved, right? Despite stresses and strains, perhaps inevitably, the basic framework of the responsible government, with the necessary balance between elected legislatures, functional executives, and vigilant democracy, Indian constitution has remained vigilant, I would say. Um, though there, if you think about, if the success of the Indian constitution, we should look at Africa and other neighbors in Asia, even far away Latin America, and the socialist world in Eastern Europe. And Indians realize what they have, right? And that we have done a lot, I would say. Whether Indian democracy is formal or substantial, right? We have accepted our constitution as real enough. The courts have acted as guardians of citizens against encroachment by the state as well as private institutions. We have expanded, as I was mentioning before, the Article 21, right? We have expanded it to, you know, interpret that the poor person cannot be imprisoned for not paying his debt. We have expanded it to basically the environmental protection, the right to breathe good air would also come under that. We have been flexible, right, for amendments, etc. Now, if you think about all this, we should realize the fact that, as Dr. Rajendra Prasad said at the time of framing of constitution, that the constitution can only be as good as the people who work. And therefore, right, with that, in this chapter, and would profess everyone to basically follow the constitution principles, especially once they are as part of the civil services of India. Right, if you have any questions, to comment, right, and do write to us at imprintknowledgesolutions@gmail.com. Thank you so much.